The psychology of learning stands as one of the foundational pillars of psychological science. To understand how organisms adapt to their environment, acquire new behaviors, and modify existing ones, psychologists have long turned to the study of learning processes. Among the most influential and empirically substantiated frameworks in this domain are classical conditioning and operant conditioning, two paradigms that emerged from distinct historical trajectories, yet together offer a powerful explanatory model for a wide range of human and animal behavior. These learning theories not only shaped the development of behaviorism in the early 20th century, but continue to inform contemporary approaches in psychotherapy, education, behavioral economics, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence. Classical conditioning, often associated with the Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov, emerged from experimental work on digestive processes in dogs. Pavlov observed that dogs salivated not only when food was presented, but also in response to stimuli that had become associated with food, such as the sound of a bell or the presence of the laboratory assistant. Intrigued by this phenomenon, he systematically investigated the conditions under which a neutral stimulus could come to elicit a reflexive response. His findings culminated in the concept of stimulus-stimulus learning. A previously neutral stimulus, the conditioned stimulus, or CS, acquires the capacity to elicit a response, the conditioned response, or CR, after being repeatedly paired with an unconditioned stimulus, US, that naturally evokes an unconditioned response, UR. This associative process is not dependent on voluntary control. Rather, it operates on the level of automatic reflexive behavior, Pavlov, 1927. The implications of classical conditioning extend far beyond salivating dogs. In humans, this form of learning underlies a variety of emotional responses, including phobias, preferences, and aversions. Consider a child who experiences a painful injection at the doctor's office. If the clinical setting, white coat, antiseptic smell, examination table, is consistently associated with the aversive stimulus, the injection, the child may develop a conditioned fear response to the medical environment, even in the absence of pain. This phenomenon, known as conditioned emotional response, has been extensively documented and forms the basis for therapeutic techniques such as systematic desensitization and exposure therapy. Furthermore, classical conditioning plays a critical role in advertising and consumer behavior. By repeatedly pairing a product with attractive imagery, positive emotions, or desirable social scenarios, marketers attempt to elicit a favorable emotional response to the brand. Over time, consumers may come to associate the product itself with the feelings evoked by the advertisement, even if no rational basis for preference exists. However, classical conditioning is subject to important boundary conditions. Extinction occurs when the CS is presented repeatedly without the US, leading to a gradual weakening of the CR. Yet even after extinction, spontaneous recovery can occur, indicating that the original association is not entirely erased. Moreover, stimuli that resemble the CS may also elicit the CR, a phenomenon known as generalization, while the ability to distinguish between similar stimuli is called discrimination. These principles reflect the nuanced adaptability of conditioned responses and their relevance to real-life learning situations. While classical conditioning centers on involuntary responses, operant conditioning, developed most prominently by B.F. Skinner, focuses on voluntary behavior and the consequences that follow it. Rooted in the earlier work of Edward Thorndike and his law of effect, operant conditioning posits that behaviors are shaped and maintained by their consequences. Behaviors followed by reinforcing outcomes are more likely to recur, whereas those followed by punishing outcomes are less likely to be repeated. Skinner, 1938. Skinner distinguished between two types of reinforcement: positive reinforcement, where a behavior increases because it is followed by a rewarding stimulus, and negative reinforcement, where a behavior increases because it removes or avoids an aversive stimulus. Importantly, negative reinforcement is not punishment. It strengthens behavior by removing discomfort. Punishment, by contrast, is any consequence that decreases the likelihood of a behavior. It too comes in two forms: positive punishment, adding an aversive stimulus, and negative punishment, removing a desirable stimulus. The principles of operant conditioning have been demonstrated across species, from pigeons pecking keys for food to humans navigating complex social systems. Reinforcement schedules, patterns that determine when and how reinforcements are delivered, play a critical role in shaping behavior. Continuous reinforcement leads to rapid learning, but also rapid extinction. In contrast, intermittent reinforcement schedules, such as variable ratio, e.g., slot machines, or variable interval, e.g., checking social media notifications, produce more resistant behaviors and are especially potent in creating habitual patterns. Operant conditioning is omnipresent in educational contexts. A teacher praising a student for a correct answer provides positive reinforcement, thereby increasing the likelihood that the student will engage again. Detention or reprimands may function as punishment, although their effectiveness depends on the context, consistency, and the perceived fairness of the consequence. More sophisticated applications involve token economies, behavior contracts, and self-monitoring systems, all grounded in operant principles. Moreover, behavioral therapies for disorders such as autism spectrum disorder often employ operant techniques to build functional communication and reduce problematic behaviors. In real-life settings, operant conditioning subtly shapes daily routines and social interactions. Consider a commuter who consistently receives positive feedback for arriving early at work. Over time, punctuality becomes reinforced. Conversely, someone who faces criticism for speaking up in meetings may learn to suppress their contributions. These learning histories can accumulate into behavioral patterns that appear stable or even personality-like, yet they are often the product of accumulated contingencies. Despite its empirical power, operant conditioning is not without critique. Some psychologists argue that it underemphasizes internal cognitive processes, such as beliefs, expectations, and motivations. Indeed, the cognitive revolution in the 1960s challenged behaviorist orthodoxy, leading to models that integrate reinforcement principles with mental representations. For example, Albert Bandura's concept of observational learning or modeling demonstrated that individuals can acquire new behaviors simply by watching others, without direct reinforcement. Bandura, 1977. Such findings expanded the learning paradigm to include vicarious processes, expectancies, and the role of self-efficacy. Furthermore, neurobiological research has illuminated the brain mechanisms underlying conditioning. In operant conditioning, the dopaminergic reward system, particularly the mesolimbic pathway, plays a critical role in processing reinforcement. The anticipation and receipt of rewards activate the nucleus accumbens and ventral tegmental area, releasing dopamine and reinforcing behavior at the neural level. Schultz, 1998. In classical conditioning, the amygdala is central in forming associations between neutral stimuli and emotional responses, particularly fear. The intersection of learning theory with modern challenges and technologies invites new ethical and practical considerations. How do social media platforms, with their intermittent reinforcement systems, exploit operant conditioning to maximize user engagement? What role does classical conditioning play in addiction, where environmental cues trigger craving and relapse? Can we design educational software that tailors reinforcement schedules to individual learners for optimal motivation? These questions illustrate that learning theories are not relics of the laboratory, but active frameworks for interpreting and shaping the digital, social, and moral landscape of the 21st century. Reflecting on the psychology of learning raises deeper philosophical and pedagogical inquiries. To what extent is human behavior free, if so much of it is shaped by contingencies of reinforcement and unconscious associations? How can we foster autonomy and moral development in a world governed by behavioral laws? Should educators and therapists rely on rewards and punishments, or rather cultivate intrinsic motivation and meaning? In conclusion, classical and operant conditioning provide a rich empirically grounded foundation for understanding how behavior is acquired, maintained, and modified. They have revolutionized not only experimental psychology, but also practical domains such as education, therapy, animal training, and marketing. Yet their greatest value lies perhaps in their capacity to illuminate the hidden architecture of behavior. That beneath the surface of our choices and habits lie patterns of association and consequence that have been quietly shaping us all along. By making these patterns visible, we open the door to more intentional, ethical, and effective ways of influencing ourselves and others.